How's everybody doing?
Pretty well.
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm wearing the Rory hat today, so I'm like the virtual bouncer trying to let people in the door right now. Checking IDs over here.
Yeah, I was wondering what would be better, like to do. I feel like the passcode might be too confusing.
Yeah, I feel like we have like a very quaint bunch, so it's kind of chill. But those national calls can be crazy. You guys are all lucky
Oh
I'm not doing
gosh.
dress code checks because I'm sure a lot of you aren't wearing dress shoes. I'm wearing basketball shorts, so I can't.
Yeah, I've got yoga pants.
Hey, Bennett. Kelly, it looks like we have a pretty good group 2 minutes in. Did you want to maybe kick off and do an intro and I'll watch the door?
Sure. I have been on vacation, so I don't really have like a whole lot of background, but I know we were talking about housing inequality, and COVID, and Bennett Simonson from Pima Animal Care Center here is here with us to start off the discussion. And really excited to have you here, Bennett.
Thanks, y'all, for having me. It's an important topic. So, is my microphone working correctly today?
Hear you a little quiet, but we can hear you.
Is this better?
A little better. Okay. I can turn it up a little.
Okay. So I shared this PowerPoint at a call the other week that people were really interested in, so they wanted me to share it today. I can't get the actual PowerPoint, but I have this PDF, so we're gonna make do with this. We've been talking a lot over the last couple of months about the eviction crisis and these evictions that we, excuse me, expect to see going forward over the next few months. I just wanted to give y'all some details about what the experts think that looks like, and what it could mean for animal welfare. So if you aren't already aware, there was a huge gap in affordable housing before the COVID crisis happened. For people who were making 100% of the area median income, there were about 100 houses available for each person. For somebody who is extremely low income, which is less than 50% of the average median income of any certain area, there were only 36 homes available for every 100 people who needed to find a house. So for every 100 people who were at that income level, they only had 36 options available to them. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, they recommend that somebody spend no more than 30% of their income on housing. For people who were extremely low income, almost all of them, 9 million of them in the US, were cost burdened with their rent, which meant that they were spending over 30% of their income on rent. This doesn't have percentages, but this is 90-some%, and this is around 80%. So 90-some% of people who are living, who have an extremely low income, are spending over 30% of their income in rent. And then over 7.7 million people were spending over 50% of their income in rent. And when you're talking about people who are extremely low income, this is extreme. If somebody's making about $10 an hour, that's about $1,500 a month. If they're lucky enough to find somewhere to rent for $750, which is incredibly difficult to do, that's half of their income just on rent. Then they only have $750 left to buy food, to pay for transportation, to pay utilities, and to take care of any pets that they may have. So we've had an affordable housing crisis in this country for a very long time, and COVID is just exacerbating it. So there's this thing called the Household Pulse Survey, which is put out by the Census Bureau every 2 weeks. and they ask a bunch of questions about how people are faring during this pandemic. For 33.5% of households in the US, foreclosure or eviction is somewhat or very likely within the next 2 months. Some places is much higher than others, like Hawaii has like a 12% rate of people who are facing eviction or foreclosure. District of Columbia has 60% of people who are very or somewhat likely to be evicted or foreclosed on in the next 2 months. Arizona, which is where a lot of my data focuses on, 23.3% of people are very likely and 23.8% of people are somewhat likely to be evicted or foreclosed upon in the next 2 months. So this is a huge problem affecting a huge portion of the population. 32.7% of households nationally are having trouble paying for their usual expenses, and the rent shortfall is going to be in the billions. I've seen estimates as low as 10 billion, but I've actually seen some go up into the 30 billions. This is not only rent that people are owing to their landlords right now, this is rental income that landlords and property management companies haven't been getting. So these billions of dollars are just completely missing from the economy, and there's no plans yet to fill in that gap. So we've been talking about this crisis for a couple months now, but we haven't really started to see it come in. And I think people are starting to assume that it's not that big of an issue because we haven't seen the impacts yet. But only 7.3% of households are either not current on their rent or mortgage, or they have little to no confidence that they can pay next month's rent. In DC, 10% of people are not current and don't have confidence that they can pay. And when you look at that number compared to the 23% number that third of people who think they're going to be evicted in the next 2 months, it's easy to assume that there's not actually a problem. People think they're going to be evicted, but they're still able to pay their rent. But the problem is how people have been paying their rent so far. So if only 7.3% of people are behind on rent, well, 91% of people who are very likely to be evicted within the next 2 months have been using credit cards or loans to pay for their expenses. 88 have been selling assets or using their savings to pay for their expenses, and 100% of people have been borrowing from friends. So even though only 7% of people are behind on their rent, the methods they've been using up until this point to stay current on their rent aren't going to be around for much longer. Credit cards are going to get maxed out. Loans are not going to be available anymore, or they're all going to come due. So there's this cascading issue of problems. People aren't going to have assets to continue selling off, and their friends aren't going to be able to keep loaning them money. So we're hitting this point where this problem is going to become very apparent very quickly because there's no other solutions for people. There's no backup for them like they've had so far. So even conservative numbers predict huge numbers of people are going to be evicted and they're going to become homeless. For Pima County, which has a population of about 1 million people, partially really urban, big city, part of it is very rural, our very conservative estimates say that 15,000 people or 15,000 households, that's 41,000 people, are going to be evicted. They said our conservative estimates say another 4,000 people are going to become homeless. And in our state population, there were only 11,000 homeless people within the whole state of Arizona. So we're going to be adding another 4,000 to that number just in Pima County. And these estimates are really conservative numbers. They're assuming that only 40% of households that get filed for eviction end in a writ of eviction where they actually have to leave. And they're estimating that only 10% of people are becoming homeless. The experts I got these numbers from say that they don't think those conservative estimates are going to hold. And even their high-end estimates, which put about 50,000 households being evicted and 15,000 people being homeless, they think those are going to be much more in line with what things are actually going to look like. These numbers, these estimates don't take rental assistance programs into account. So there are programs out there to provide rental assistance to people. And these estimates are not taking that into account. Unfortunately, rental assistance isn't nearly as effective as we would hope it would be. The actual act of rental assistance is very effective. The need is much higher than anybody anticipated, so rental assistance isn't able to help in most cases. So for like Houston, they had $15 million of rental assistance pledged. All of it was assigned to people within the first 2 hours of applications opening. They expected to help 7,000 residents, and they got 17,000 applications within those 2 hours. So the need in Houston is much, much higher than the city could actually meet. And we're seeing that all across the country with all these rental assistance programs that are out there. It's important to realize that rental debt remains even after an eviction. So if somebody is evicted and is able to find somewhere to stay and doesn't become homeless, their 6-9 months of rent that they were behind on does not go away. They still owe those months of rent. They also owe fees for late rent. They owe interest on the rent, and they owe court costs. On top of that, it's now going to be harder for them to find a new rental property because they have an eviction on their record. So they're probably going to have to pay higher deposits and like security down payments to get into a new home. So it's going to be very difficult. The rental market has been incredibly tight already. And unfortunately, this crisis is causing some property owners to sell their properties, which is going to make the rental market become even tighter. Like I am very privileged and I have the ability to move, but my landlord said that he's selling his property and we aren't able to find a place to rent, even with our budget, which is much higher than most people. There are like 4 rental properties available in all of Tucson. So we're dealing with this rental crisis in the past of not having enough affordable housing. People are struggling right now and are going to end up evicted or trying to find somewhere to live because of it. And then going forward, there's going to be even fewer rental properties available. So this is just a compounding issue that seems to be getting worse the more you look into it, honestly. Perfect world models say that the economy is going to recover in late 2021, but that assumes that everything goes right from here on out. And this was before the last 2 weeks where the economy has changed significantly over the last 2 weeks. So even if things go absolutely perfect from now until 2021, it's still another year before the economy bounces back to where it was. Current economic modeling can't actually predict the long-term impacts of this crisis because it's not anything that we've ever seen before. So the economic models don't know how to make predictions. It's also important to remember that economic indicators, things like the stock market and GDP, show economic growth as a whole, but it doesn't show how growth is distributed. And traditionally, it has been way worse off for people toward the bottom of the earnings scale, even when other economic indicators say that things are recovering. So the current solutions we have are inadequate. Back rent is still going to be due, even if we keep having this eviction moratorium. The CDC eviction moratorium means that nobody can be put out on the street right now for non-payment of rent. But that back rent is still going to be due once the CDC eviction moratorium expires at the end of the year. And if we just cancel the debt, it's going to shift to the landlords and the property management companies, which will still likely end in eviction because people are going to sell off their properties or go out of business because they aren't able to pay their own mortgages. So the CDC eviction moratorium is in effect until December 31st. It's pretty strict language. It says that nobody can be evicted except for breach of contract or criminal activity. If somebody files a CDC declaration form, which is just a letter that says they've been impacted by COVID or they will be homeless if they get kicked out of this place, the eviction process halts. So even if somebody's there to put them out on the street, if they file that eviction letter, that CDC moratorium letter, then the process halts. However, landlords and courts are not required to explain this to their tenants. It's very, very common in eviction court for the whole thing to take 90 seconds. They walk in, introduce themselves, the judge rules, and they don't actually get to make their case. This also only limits evictions due to non-payment of rent. Landlords can still be evicted for breach of contract, or tenants can still be evicted for breach of contract. So breach of contract has traditionally been serious breaches of contract, somebody selling drugs out of their property or damaging the property. But the constables here in Pima County have told us they've seen an increase of breach filings lately. And they've seen it for stuff as small as a guy used to keep his motorcycle out in his front yard. It got stolen, so he brought it inside. And now he's being evicted because he brought his motorcycle inside. It's basically up to individual judges whether they allow those types of evictions to go forward. The other problem with the CDC eviction moratorium is that it's being challenged in court. Landlords and property management companies are saying that it's an illegal order and that it's not in their best interest for it to hold up. So it may be struck down in court before December 31st. And then there's no path forward in Congress. I don't know if y'all saw yesterday, but Trump has said that there's not going to be any stimulus package or rental relief until after the election. So right now there's no plan for any way to combat this. So I got this info off the National Low Income Housing Coalition. If you're interested in this, it's a fantastic resource. I also got it from the Household Pulse Survey from the Census Bureau. That's a bi-weekly survey that's done across the US just to get an idea of what the economic picture looks like. It also looks at small businesses. So it's a really interesting thing if you want to look at it. And what I realized I didn't talk on so much is how this impacts us. But even if, I think nationally 60% of households own pets. Even if we're assuming that their pet ownership is at a lower rate amongst people who are at risk for eviction, even if it's at 40%, that's 15,000 households that are going to be evicted just in my county. And what we're going to get in 6,000 animals on a very conservative estimate. Like this is going to have a huge impact for shelters. Oh, thank you, Bobby. So do you have any questions? I know this is depressing and I'm like I feel like a doomsday person, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Bennett. Any questions from the group? I know I have a couple, but I'd love to give people an opportunity.
Bennett, hi, it's Chris in Rochester, New York. What are you folks doing in Pima to prep your team? I think you were there. You had a constable come to the Monday morning talk a couple weeks ago. Are you still doing that kind of work to try and intercede upstream more than just kind of waiting for the evictions and then boarding agreements and so forth?
Yeah, I meet weekly with a group of people from the county and from the state and federal legislature, just people who are working on this issue in Pima County, just to stay up to date with what's going on in all the other departments. So that's part of what we're doing, is just keeping our staff, making sure they're up to date on what the picture looks like. We are making sure to communicate with these agencies that are providing housing relief or getting people into rapid rehoming. We are letting them know that we have resources available and are making sure that they know they can contact us if needed for their clients in any way. We've started to develop an emergency boarding program that I'm hoping is going to be able to address this issue. We want to we want to work with these agencies that are rehoming people, rehousing people, and the people who have case managers, and then give those people up to 3 months of temporary boarding. It would really be a 1-month contract with 2 1-month extensions so that you have to stay in contact with the person. We also have information we're putting out there about this is what to do if you think you're going to be evicted. Call us first. These are your options. this is how you live on the street with a pet. There's going to be a lot of different information coming out. I want to help as many people as possible, but the scope of the problem, like, it's a little overwhelming.
Are you going to be sharing those what to do tips with the whole Haas group, or?
Yeah, I can send them to Bobby so he can share them.
Right on. Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
Hey, Bennett, I just shared the link to the declaration form. What is PAC doing? I know you said it's not a requirement for landlords to share this information. What is PAC doing to really get this information in front of the community now versus, because I know oftentimes people don't call us until they're in crisis, until they have to give up their pet. So how are you getting people aware of this opportunity?
The CDC moratorium, we haven't been sharing that much with people because there was a question for a while about whether or not it constituted legal advice. Even the constables weren't comfortable sharing it for a while, but they just got told by the attorneys in our county that it's publicly available knowledge and does not constitute legal advice. So we're going to start asking people questions if they say they're being evicted or they're going to lose their home. Ask if they filled out the moratorium, and then point them to the resources where the moratorium exists. And then we have some amazing other county resources, people who are better equipped to deal with the housing issues that have websites and resource links. So we'll direct people to those.
Hey, Bennett, that was really good information. I know it's not always easy to talk about that, but it's really eye-opening. But what are you all doing in terms of sort of prepping your staff? Any sort of extra training that's happening? Is there any volunteer roles that you also are bringing in? So I'm just thinking about how you're prepping the team that you have at PAC.
So far, it's just been a lot of conversations about what this looks like, what we're expecting down the line. I oversee our pet support department, which is where anybody who's going to have to surrender, they call and get counseled beforehand. So it's just a lot of discussing with them and making sure that they're understanding this balance we need to hit of providing this service to people who are going through crisis, but still not bringing in every animal that, like, not bringing the animal in just because they call and say they need us to. So it's just providing different resources to them, like the information about what people can do when they are facing homelessness. Yeah, so far it's just been a lot of me trying to filter as much information down as possible. But if anybody has any ideas on specific training that may be helpful in this situation, I'd definitely love to hear it.
And Chris and I actually just got done with the government budgeting working group for the Haas project, and a big part of what we're trying to talk about is, one, promoting healthy and safe communities, and then keeping pets with their families. Are you using any of this forecasted data for evictions in any of your budgetary asks or reporting moving forward for the agency?
I don't think we've been taking it into account just yet, but we are taking it into account with some of our other programs, like our Keeping Families Together pet support program, where we provide assistance for medical care. Like, we're adjusting our qualifications and our standards for that, knowing what's coming down the line with this and what other problems we will be facing.
What are you seeing so far, and do you expect it to happen? I mean, I'm guessing, if it happens, it could happen kind of all at once. What do you expect it to, I guess, look like?
Yeah, well, so far we've been seeing an increase in people saying that they just don't have resources to pay for other things, medical care, food. They're considering surrendering just because they're struggling more in general, and the pet is a place to cut costs. We're not seeing a ton of evictions or people being worried about evictions just yet, but based on my feedback I've gotten from other county departments, There are some people who have heard that there's a moratorium and then aren't feeling a urgency to get their situations dealt with, which is completely understandable. If you're dealing with all this other crisis, you want to stick that off to the side and deal with it later. So yeah, I think it's going to happen all at once. I think there's going to be a moratorium that ends, and you're going to see it happen across the country depending on how long evictions take to get processed in your area. Right now, I think all we can do is try to, or the best thing we can do is try to get information out there that you are a resource and people should call you as soon as they think there may be an issue. Call early instead of waiting until you've tried all of your other options. Yeah, that's.
For your temporary boarding program, are you guys, what are you guys doing, I guess, to like prep and to get people ready to be there when you need them?
We've started putting out pleas to people like, would you be willing to foster in a situation like this? We started to test the waters with some more straightforward cases of people who are hospitalized for short periods of time. And we're seeing how those go. I guess this is the blessing of the current eviction moratorium, is we have a couple of months until we really need to have everything figured out. We are prepping fosters that are taking the animals in the cases we've done so far that, you know, we don't know how this is going to end up. We're going to try it, and there's a chance. But yeah, just trying to get those first question please for people who are possibly interested out there now. And we're trying to create our policies and procedures now to make sure that we have everything ready to go once evictions start hitting.
Have any of the shelters on this call started having conversations with their staff about this? I just feel like besides people that are on these conversations or in some of these HOS working groups, a lot of my shelter friends aren't, this isn't even on their radar yet. They're not really thinking about this. I would love to hear from some of you on the call.
Hey guys, it's Kathy in Ontario, Canada. So one of the challenges I have is trying to get similar types of information for our area in Ontario, because the CDC is not going to help me, and all those lovely links you sent. However, I did copy them so that I can try and find associated organizations here. And I think I've mentioned in the past, we're sort of a strange structure from a governmental standpoint here. We're a lower tier municipality. We report through to a regional government that is made up of ourselves and 2 other municipalities or municipal governments. All the social services pieces are at the municipal or at the regional level. So until I can actually get some numbers to talk to staff about, I have sort of shared in general terms the fact that we need to be concerned that this can happen. There is some media happening up here about these types of things happening, but not nearly to the same extent as the media I'm seeing from the US. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not happening, it's just not making the news here. So working on it, but still a bit of a challenge here.
Hi, this is Jen from Baltimore. We've been talking with Maryland Legal Aid, which is our local group of lawyers that do pro bono work, and they're creating a flyer and a handout for us to give folks. So we have a lot of people obviously that will just come to the door and be like, I'm being evicted today, here you go. And so they're going to get involved as much as they can. We're also working with another group to have social workers here on site, so we can also just hopefully connect them right away with somebody immediate, because a lot of times Maryland Legal Aid's helped us in the past, but if they're not physically here, people are too afraid to take their animal and make that call or do that follow-up. So we're trying to tackle it from a couple different angles, and trying to get these other groups involved to just help us with them as they come in. And then there are, as you were saying, there are no easy answers. So we also are working on building up our fosters on deck also, to see if there's any, if we can put them into foster care while we're trying to see if they're going to be able to rehome them, because we don't have fundings to support for boarding and things like that. So we're going to see if we can do it through the foster program. Part of our problem is with these evictions and the communication amongst all the departments is they don't give us the information of who the owner even is. Or the owner has no idea where their animals went. And that's something we're trying to work on the back end now as well. And we've been trying, but when you have the sheriff's, police department, animal control, and then the landlord and, all these different parties, we don't always get the information at our shelter in the end. So it sort of is a dead end for us quite often. So we're trying to get those pieces worked out, but that's been an ongoing issue for us. The Maryland Legal Aid thing, I'm probably the most excited about, because they're going to really focus on us during this time. So really excited about that partnership.
How did you start those partnerships?
So I knew someone who knew someone. I used to, back in the day, volunteer doing TNR before I was even in the shelter world. And coincidentally, another volunteer there was with Maryland Legal Aid. And then when I started Barks 15 years ago, we just got talking about how we could initially work together on changing the laws for TNR, because she just happened to be interested in that. And then from there, we realized there was other ways that we could partner. So they actually came because I knew her, we actually had a few times where they came even to our wellness clinics that we did in the community. They would set up a table, and then they were like, wow, there's so many people here, we could help. We got to figure out how to do more. So this year, I actually approached them, and I got somebody that's pretty high up in the organization to serve on my board, so that we could look at these community type services and efforts a little bit closer, because it all sounds good when, but until you really understand what each other are doing and going through it, it's hard to coordinate. But now it's helped it to go to that next level. So I just got lucky.
You're doing that. That's just amazing.
Hey, Jen, Jen and I had a really interesting conversation maybe about a week or two ago, where she almost dipped her toes in the water of what it was like to deal with this eviction issue, because I believe you said in your community for almost like a 2-week period, there was a situation where the moratorium was accidentally lifted and you saw an influx of animals coming in. Could you touch on that and how that impacted your team?
I still don't know we still don't know what happened, but all of a sudden there were some coming in. And so for me, I just didn't even realize, I didn't even think about that some, like when contracts ended, landlords were just taking that as their advantage to say, okay, you're out now. That was one piece of it. There was like, oh, right, that they could get out that way. So they were finding some loopholes. So we were already seeing some of that. But then for like a week and a half or almost 2 weeks, they were just starting to come in much higher volume. And we were like, what's going on? And animal control kept saying, yeah, I thought it was all these contracts, that were ending. And animal control, who we partner with and we're in the same building, they just handle the enforcement side, we handle the sheltering. They said they've been going because the sheriff's department actually started them back up. So she started to make phone calls and try to figure out why they were doing that, because they're still not supposed to be. And then all of a sudden it stopped. So we think from her probing, it's sort of like, oh, somebody started doing these and they weren't supposed to. And it put a hold on them again. That's what we think, but we're a little afraid to keep digging because we're afraid it might start back up or something. So so I don't really know, but it definitely started to set off alarm bells, because we know there's this list. And then when the go button hits, they're just going to start bringing them in, and we've got to figure out how to not let that happen as best as we can.
It might be a good idea for people to look into who actually does the evictions in your community. Because like I know when I was back in Charlotte, North Carolina, it was the sheriff's office. Here it's specially elected constables, and every community's different. Like in Charlotte, when the sheriff came, all your stuff got put out on the street right then. You had no idea when they were coming. Here, the constables have the ability to give you 10 days to get your stuff out. So they can, like each individual constable can decide how long you have, and it can mean your pet stays in your home rather than going straight to the shelter. So if you can figure out who does your evictions, maybe you can get them to give you a little wiggle room and work with you more.
Erica, you had said something in the chat about you guys have a boarding program at your organization.
Well, I wouldn't say that. We would, you know, we have less animals right now than we normally would. So animals that we were normally sending out to a boarding facility through our foundation, we have, you know, kept a couple of those in-house this week. And it's just in literally the last 48 hours, we got 2 that apply for that situation. I will say from us providing boarding both in-house for like domestic violence victims or something like that in the past with an MOU we have with our domestic violence shelter. And they also take in animals at the shelter as well. We, you know, with the partnering with boarding facilities by paying them to take some of these on, and even some of the retention stuff that we've done recently, it's almost like we always see these animals back. Like a month isn't long enough, or something else happens in a very short amount of time and we see the animals back. And so we're trying to go into this as positive as possible, but it's also very defeating when very few of these animals actually stay out for more than 6 months. And I'm not sure, you know, at the end of the day, I'm sure we're going to have to do the math after doing this for a year if the volume picks up and figure out, is the money really worth it in the end if 90% of them are coming back to us?
Are you guys tracking data on that?
We are. I mean, right now we just have a spreadsheet. So when there's, you know, however we get it, we have a little form that any of the staff fills out that might pick up the call, or if an animal control reaches out to me, then we'll sort of work through it, and we just keep it logged in a spreadsheet right now. I don't think we kept really good track of it in the past because it was through a Maddie's grant. So we were keeping it through the grant and not necessarily in our own format. But we're definitely going to, you know, be more cognizant of doing that moving forward. I mean, we have stats on the ones that we've kept for homeless people, for people in the hospital, for people in jail, you know, all what we would consider quite a safe, what do we call them? I'm trying to think of what our category is. It's something like safe owner, where we're essentially boarding the animal. And it actually came out of Hurricane Michael a few years ago when, not to make this really detailed, but we had a bus come in to Tallahassee from a very hard hit area of the hurricane. And all these people that were special needs were told to bring their animals with them. And the shelter they were taking them to would not accept the animals. It was strictly an animal, no animal. And so at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're working with emergency personnel going, oh, what are we going to do with these macaws? What about this ferret? You know, I mean, like, people brought all of their animals on this bus that came. And so we suddenly realized that we were now boarding animals. And so it sort of morphed out of that. Thankfully, we put the parrots in foster care because a shelter is no place for parrots.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, try figuring it out at 1 a.m. when nobody really knows who's in charge after a major hurricane.
There seem to be, this is Erica. I'm the course developer at Maddie's Fund for Maddie's University. And I listen in on these to hear what you all are concerned about. One of the earliest courses I put together is called Shelter Staff as Crisis Counselors. And there seemed to be some consensus on the call that it's worthwhile to have somebody to talk to, even if there aren't a lot of resources behind it. And I wondered if that class is used a lot for shelter staff training across the country. And I wonder if it would be worth adding something, maybe with Bennett's help, if he would be willing, to that course, specifically aimed at eviction conversations.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, Erica, that is such a good point. In this group, for everybody that's here, how many of your organizations, and you can use the chat to answer this, how many of your organizations actually accept or take the calls that come to your shelter versus a call center or like a 311 agency? So one of the things that we're, through the HOS project, we're working on is we're launching a 311, 211 case management working group, where we see that some of the biggest struggles we see in access to services or information is that call centers are not triaging the calls the way that the shelters hope that they would be doing. And, you know, part of it is how do you give them that knowledge tree for the resources, but also how do you change the culture when it's just, hey, we need to get through X amount of calls in our queue. I'd love to hear some thoughts. If any of you have really good relationships with your call centers about supporting your community members, how are you able to accomplish that?
We're dealing with that right now because half of our pet support center staff, like it's in-house, but it's one call center that everything comes into. Half of them have been there a while, half are brand new. So with the staff that's brand new, I'm just starting out with a training on dealing with people in crisis and like different ways of customer service and how to deal with it, and just trying to re-emphasize that our goal is to be a resource for the community. And if we get behind in calls, that's okay, as long as we are providing that resource for that person. In conjunction, we're also trying to streamline and like figure out ways to do things quicker to cut down on unnecessary time taken on these calls. But for us, it's just been starting out and training at the very beginning with an emphasis on good customer service.
Bobby, we use a call center, so as I put in the chat, it's the 911 center for most of the the reactive animal services calls for at-large dogs and so forth. But we have a call reduction center, the 311 for non-emergencies. So with the 311 center, I can interject. I feel like more. Triage, or they rely heavily on the city's website as a knowledge base. So as long as we keep populating our web pages and informing them of things that we're doing, then their staff, their call takers, are equipped with those resources. And so if it would be like a link to something that we're talking about today, I could put the link on our website, and it would effectively put that in the hands of the call takers. When we implement something specific, like has been done with lost and found practices in the last few months, and asking finders to participate in the process and getting resources to the finders or to the owners of lost pets, we actually laid out the protocol, emailed it to the point of contact at the 311 center, and then had some email exchange to clarify some things. But they're implementing it through the 311 center. The 911 center is a different story. So not making as much headway there.
That's great. I'd love to see that information that you shared with them. That'd be awesome. Kathy?
Yes, so we're struggling with our relationship with our 311 center. We spend an awful lot of time and resource on providing training to them on how to enter calls for us in Chameleon, as well as putting together what they refer to as knowledge articles, which sounds similar to the setup Chris has, except it's not an external facing website. It's internal that they can access. And one of our biggest challenges is half the time they don't follow those. So we've been talking about, for a year or so now, about the possibility of bringing the call taking back in-house to animal services. But we run into the challenge that from a staffing resource standpoint, the call center takes our calls 24/7. So that would be a challenge for us.
We've struggled with just on our animal control side alone, we were pressured to go straight to 911 dispatching throughout the day as well as at night, because right now they dispatch for us at night through a pager system. And I would say about half the pages that we get are absolutely inappropriate, bizarre stuff that they only got half the information on, or they're dispatching for us and it actually is a county address because we only do city animal control. So that's a cluster in and of itself. But what we realized is that our dispatcher that we have during the daytime hours, approximately 2/3 of her time on the phone is educating people and walking them through solutions that do not involve an officer having to respond. So we debated and we went back and forth. Okay, so do you want 911 just automatically dispatching that to animal control and each officer has to sit on the phone and educate each individual person? Or do you want one person getting all the calls and being able to disseminate essentially the same message when you're educating people about the cat that they found or their lost dog that they're frantic of and did you pick it up and all of those sorts of things. And so she, you know, that's what she handles as the dispatcher, and we felt like that was invaluable, and we fought it and we won so that we don't have 911 dispatching us, and I think they're probably thankful for it too.
Michelle, I see your comment in the chat about the resource center for San Diego Humane. I'd love to hear, I mean, being sort of a multi-contract organization, I think what you guys maybe have 12 or 13 different jurisdictions, maybe more now. How are you supporting each of those individual contracts? Do they come through one phone number? Do they get redirected to you? And then how do you provide that information to the officers for support?
As far as I'm aware, and I wonder if there's anyone on the call here that might know better from San Diego Humane, but we do have a resource center for our main set of phone calls that comes in for like information, but we also have a dispatch team on site. So we actually are lucky enough to have both. So anything that's HLE related does go to dispatch. And anything that's more sort of informative about wellness or appointments or spay neuter will generally go through the resource center. So they are two separate on-site rooms of people on the phone.
That's awesome. So one thing that we're really excited about through the HOS project, because keeping families together is such an important part of what we're doing, and the eviction crisis is obviously looming. We've had the opportunity, thanks to Life of Riley from Spring Point, to hire a project manager that is going to be assigned to build a toolkit for support for Tier 1 and Tier 2 shelters. We'd love to hear from all of you about what resources do you think would be helpful for that? And sort of, we're trying to set a foundation or expectations for this new person coming in on how you would all like to be supported through this.
It's Kathy in Ontario, Canada again. I think I've said this before in the past, but some of the most helpful stuff I've seen come through these groups are the templates. You know, somebody was talking about temporary boarding, and Bennett was talking about, you know, customer support and client support and how they help people. So if people already have things they've developed, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel, I just have to read it and go, okay, this, I can change this and this, and poof, it's gone. That is the biggest help for me.
Anyone else?
Bobby, you know, thinking about some of the other toolkits we've seen or that we use, that, you know, having like a bulleted list or a checklist of steps or recommended steps is, you know, in addition to having the actual pieces, which I agree with Kathy. It's nice to be able to just plug something in that's already working somewhere else. But to be able to digest the, you know, what needs to be done, and then figure out who's going to do it, assign the work, and get it done is helpful.
Does anybody we haven't heard from like to weigh in? Bobby, what is the timeline on that? That's really cool.
Yeah, so we actually, I believe the announcement for the new hire will be sometime this week. They're going to be starting October 12th, will be their first day. We're currently, so that's for the full-time project manager position. That's going to be a 6-month limited term position with the hopes of extending it based off of just what the output is. And then we also have a part-time coordinator position that's going to be supporting that full-time role. The full-time role will be a lot more research. So they'll be meeting with the tier 1 shelters, some of the tier 2 shelters to interview them about needs. And then the part-time person will be helping with implementation moving forward as well. So it's really exciting. Kelly, should we hold our awkward silence until somebody else chimes in?
Sure.
I'm right here with you. I'm just going to wait till someone else talks.
Oh, someone had written about indie cares, and I wasn't really sure what, it says Kay Wolsifer. Are you still here?
I am. So the purpose of that whole program is to divert animals from our intake or our back door. But a kind of offshoot of that is to, it was originally set up, in my understanding, and forgive me, I can't completely speak to this because I'm on the enforcement side of the house as opposed to the kennel side of the house, but the original thought behind that were like service members needing to go off being deployed, and they needed a home to put their pet in for a while. So that's kind of where that foster program developed from. And so I think it kind of took off from there. So I'm not real sure how involved that foster program is now, since we've had that other resource within the city that I mentioned kind of step up and help take over some of the fostering from the homeless community, because we have a special homeless unit within our police department. So they're taking care of a lot of the homeless population, which in turn, directs us towards more animals that are owned by homeless individuals. So it's very interesting. It's pretty cool. It's been a good resource for us as officers to have kind of that tool on our belt to look to.
And is it a shelter program, or is it like a friends of type program? Like how does it work?
Yeah, so it's run through our shelter, but it's mostly funded by our friends of. And but they do reach out for donations from the community, or they'll post a specific animal on our Facebook page asking for donations in reference to a specific animal or a specific situation. So it's a lot of community involvement too.
I'm just looking at your website. It looks really clean and easy to navigate.
They actually, I think it was the first of the year, they redid a lot of our web pages. So yeah, that's been very helpful.
Great. Looks like we have just a few minutes left. Any last questions or any other topics of interest anybody wants to bring up before we wrap our call today?
No, we might be sending out a survey, right? I think Casey might be sending it out just so we can get more of your feedback on topics and things that are most helpful for you as well. So look for that in your inbox in the next few weeks.
Yeah, Bennett, we're so grateful man, that you were able to join us today. I was really just amazed by the presentation on the Friday call, and I think it's so good that we're getting ahead of this and trying to be proactive. And we know there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's exciting that we're all doing it together.
I'm glad it's something people are interested in talking about now, because the earlier we get on it, the better we'll be able to address it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That totally blew my mind.
Well, if nothing else, I think people are going to get about 3 minutes to grab some water and stretch before their next calls. So as always, Kelly and I are incredibly grateful that you're here, and stay tuned for an email about next week's upcoming summit.
Have a great rest of your week, guys.